Welcome to the Believe Show. Today we're here with Dan Markovitz. Hi, Dan.
Hello, Senya.
Let me tell you a few things about Dan before we start. I'm really glad I'm about to tell you this. Dan Markovitz is a two-time Shingo Research Award-winning author, speaker, and consultant. Before he became fluent in Japanese, he asked a fishmonger to wake up the squid. Now he commutes between Marin and New York City. Hello, Dan.
Thank you for telling people that story, Senya. It's something that's near and dear to my heart.
Thank you for sharing that story with us. Let me also share with people your book. So this is Dan's book. It's on Amazon. It's called The Conclusion Trap. We'll be talking about some content similar to that. So if you are interested, hop onto Amazon, look for Dan Markovitz and The Conclusion Trap. So what happened with the fishmonger?
Well, I was living in Japan. I lived there for 4 years, and this was about a year and a half in. My Japanese had gotten pretty good at that point, I thought. And I went to the supermarket, went to the fish counter, and I wanted to get squid. But I'd never cleaned squid myself. It's actually not that hard if you haven't done it, but I had never done it before. And I thought, well, I'll ask them to clean the squid. So, I know how to say clean. And so I went up there and I asked them to clean the squid. And they looked at me with this very puzzled expression and following my mother's footsteps. And they said, I don't understand, or what, or something like that. And following my mother's lead, of course, I did what you always do, which is say it again, but louder. So I said, can you clean the squid? Okoshite kudasai. And they looked at me again. The woman looked at me as though I was bereft of my senses. And she says, just a moment, hold on, one moment. And she scurries to the back to get the manager. And he comes out. And at this point, I'm frustrated because I know we both lived in Japan, had the experience of living in Japan. And there's this really uncomfortable thing that happens sometimes when they look at you and your face is Caucasian and the words out of your mouth are Japanese and they can't make the connection. So their brains shut off. And I'm thinking, here we go. The brains are shutting off. They can't understand me because look at my face. So the manager comes out and I say one more time, but this time with feeling, can you please, clean the squid? And he looks at me and says, in English, please. And at this point, I just sort of give up. But I say, can you clean the squid this time in English? Instead of saying okoshite kudasai, and he says, "Oh, okay." And then he mutters something to the woman who's working the counter, and they go ahead and they clean the squid. And I go home sullen and sulking, thinking, "Come on, this is ridiculous." And I look up in the dictionary. It turns out I was saying okoshite kudasai. I should have said oroshite kudasai, O-R-O. Oroshite kudasai, which means please clean. Instead, I said okoshite kudasai, which means please wake up. And so, of course, there I am, deliberately, loudly, slowly, and increasingly irritatedly saying, please wake up the squid.
That's awesome. I'm actually glad to get the detail. That's awesome.
Okoshite on orosu and okosu, they're so close, and yet so very different.
So close. And they're really trying to help you. That's why he's
right. They're really trying to help me. So it taught me, I became a little more patient when people would say, I don't understand, speak English or something, because who knows, I might be asking them to, with.
So before we jump about conclusions and jumping to conclusions, 3 lightning round questions about you. First one, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
I didn't have too much of an idea, but I figured I'd become a teacher, I think.
In a way, I mean, there are aspects of teaching to what you do.
Absolutely. And what I do now, there's an awful lot of teaching, but I sort of pictured myself in a traditional high school classroom, something like that, if for no other reason, because I had no idea what else to do when I grew up.
Good plan. And then what's one of your favorite foods?
Squid.
That's hilarious. Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome.
I'm actually, I'm an omnivore. There are very few. It's probably easier to list the things that I don't like than the things that I do like in terms of favorite food.
And then the last of these, which is that high school can be a challenging time. What was a good part of high school for you?
Very little, actually. I was not one of the cool kids. I didn't play this cool sport. I wasn't. I didn't do anything very cool. I would say actually the best part of high school for me was when I was on the track. I ran cross country and track in high school and in college, and getting away from the other students, getting away from all the pressures of high school and just being left alone to run in circles.
That's cool to know.
Rewarding, or at least a relief
That's
from.
really cool because I know you also worked at ASICS and you've loved working with outdoor brands and outdoor sports. So that's really cool to know.
That is exactly right.
Okay, Dan, what do
Senya.
you believe? Dan, Senya. We're going to do this again and again, and then in Japanese. What do you believe that others in your field may disagree with you about?
So you pointed out, of course, my newest book. There it is again, The Conclusion Trap. There we go. And I wrote it because I think what people do wrong, what I believe is that most people spend way too much time focusing on decision making, and they don't spend nearly enough time focused on understanding the problem they're dealing with. And so you read all about cognitive biases, and you read about how to have meetings and how to brainstorm effectively, and how to best practices for coming up with alternative solutions where people are not subject to the pressure from what they call the HIPPO, the highest paid person's opinion, things like that. And I think they're missing the boat entirely, because I think we need to spend way more time focused on understanding what problem it is we're trying to solve. And once you really understand the problem you're trying to solve, then you can start talking about all those other things, about how to actually make a decision better.
Do you have even just a range of percentages that you think is happening and that should be happening? Like right now, people are focusing on the solution 90% of the time, and they should be focusing on the problem. I just don't know what it is, but do you have some of that kind of hunch?
Yeah, well, there's a very famous quote. It's often attributed to Einstein. Don't know if that's actually the real, if he actually said it, but he said something like, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about it and 5 minutes coming up with a solution. And so that's 5/6, right? Or whatever it is. it's 11/12. So he certainly would spend a lot of time. And I think probably it's fair to say that at least 60 to 75% of your time should be spent trying to understand what's going on, what the problem is, and framing it properly, so that then you can start to think more intelligently about countermeasures and solutions.
How did you come to this belief?
Well, partly as a result of my experiences as an employee. I lived through, I think, 3 or 4 reorganizations at ASICS, actually, none of which resulted in anything except more time spent rewiring Cat5 cable and printing up new business cards. And then as a consultant in continuous improvement and lean operations, I would see companies again and again make mistakes where they would leap to a solution without really understanding the problem. And my favorite story, in fact, the one that was the germ of this book, or the seed, I guess I should say, was a friend of mine who runs a software company. They make custom software up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And a guy came up to him, and when I say custom software, in other words, not Office or Microsoft Excel or anything like that. It's if you need software for a dialysis machine or a diesel engine repair software. So a guy comes up to him and says, "Hey, Rich, we need an iPhone app." And Rich says, "Why do you need an iPhone app?" And he says, "Well, because I built this company. They were a moving company by cobbling together regional players. And now we're nationwide, and I'm losing a lot of business because we're not passing, my Northeast group is not passing leads to the Midwest or something like that." And Rich says, "Okay, totally makes sense." And the guy says, "The thing is that our software system's been cobbled together over the years. None of them talk to each other. They're really clunky. And an iPhone app, I mean, everyone's got an app. It makes total sense." And Rich says, "Well, let me talk to the people who would be using it." And he says, "You don't need to. I can tell you the software stinks." And Rich says, "But this is the way I do it." And the guy says, "Okay, fine." So Rich talks to all these, the salespeople, the heads of sales in all these various divisions, and they say, "Yep, software stinks. Absolutely terrible, pain in the butt to work with. But you know what the real issue is? That when I pass a lead from the Northeast to the Midwest or the Southeast or whatever, we don't get a commission." And Rich goes back to the president and says, "You don't have a technology problem, you've got a compensation problem." And the guy says, "Yeah, but I want an iPhone app." And this is a perfect example of someone who jumped to a solution. It's a commoditized idea, right? Yeah. Everyone has an app. Yeah. Every company, whether they need it or not, they have an app. And here's a guy who says, "I need an app because we don't have one." But he didn't really understand the problem. And that is so glaringly obvious. You think, "Oh, how did you possibly miss it?" But you see this stuff happen all the time. We're going to reorganize because sales are down, except your customers don't care how you're organized. Your vertical silos or horizontal value streams or matrix organizations.
Yeah.
And we leap to these things because it somehow feels right.
Yeah.
Obviously. And I think anytime you say, obviously, this is the problem, you are going down the wrong road.
Yeah. And I love the conclusion too, that's a story in your book, in the conclusion trap. And you say, look, my friend Rich, he didn't end up working with this company. It didn't make sense.
Yep, absolutely right.
Yeah.
And, hats off to him.
Yeah. Can you tell the hospital story? I really like that one, the noise.
So hospitals are graded. They, among all the grades and scores they collect, is patient satisfaction scores. They're called HCAHPS scores, and you can imagine that this is useful for hospitals in understanding what's working well and what's not working well. And there's this one hospital that a friend of mine consulted to, and the patients were complaining about this excessive noise. It was just very, very loud. It was hard for them to talk to their families. It was even harder, mostly, just to sleep because there was din all over the place. So the hospital CEO, never having spent a lot of time on the floor actually and talking to the patients, just looking at the scores. Look, the scores are terrible. He says, well, hospital floors are linoleum, right? And there's usually little bumps in it and they rattle and you're wheeling stuff up and down and the carts have casters and a lot of the casters are squeaky because they're not oiled as much as they should or greased as much as they should be. Anyway, he says, we're going to put carpeting down because carpeting is a sound deadener. We all know this, right? So they spent tens of thousands of dollars laying carpeting in this one wing in order to reduce sound. The thing is that wasn't actually the problem. The nurses, while he was spending tens of thousands of dollars putting in the carpeting, the nurses, in talking to the patients, realized that the big issue was that patients often have their TVs pretty loudly, and the nurses, in order to hear the patients, keep the doors open. So the noise, the ambient noise from the televisions is what was driving people crazy. So the nurses said, if we just close the doors or shut the doors most of the way, we can save the problem, which of course fixed the problem, didn't cost them any money. But the real killer, the thing I just love about this story, is that the year before, the hospital CEO had this initiative for, along with electronic medical records and making things more electronic and data-driven, he purchased a whole bunch of what the hospital world called cows, computers on wheels. So you got a computer, it sits on a little cart, you get to wheel it around to the patient instead of writing notes and then going back to the nurse's station. So they were supposed to bring their cows into the various rooms and have them. But now with the carpeting, it was impossible or very, very difficult to drag the computers on their wheels down the halls to the patient rooms. So on the one hand, he says you got to bring the computers. On the other hand, he's made it nearly impossible for them to drag the computers. And he spent $50,000 or something like that didn't solve any problems. And if he had just spent a little more time understanding the problem, which was loud TVs and open doors, well, there you go.
So suppose we're completely convinced, all of us who are listening to you right now, yes, it's a problem to jump to conclusions. What then instead should we be doing?
So I present a 4-step solution, obviously, because if it's not 4 steps, it's too many. Anyway, so I suggest that there are a couple things we can do. The first thing is to actually go and see. This comes straight out of the lean manufacturing playbook, which the idea here is you need to see for yourself. If you've ever watched a crime drama on TV, what's the first thing the detectives do? They go and see, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, with notes, with
everything.
everything.
In the police station,
absolutely.
They get into their beat up Chevy Caprice, and they drive out to where it is, and they look at the buildings, and they see what windows observe the street. They look for bullet casings, and they do whatever they can to see what actually happened. They go to the crime scene to get the data, to get the information.
Let me kind of push back on you a little. If the CEO is hearing this is the issue, should the CEO literally go and hang out in that wing? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And in fact, there's a reality TV show called Undercover Boss, which you may or may not be familiar with.
Yeah.
Part of it is, okay, it's reality. It's not real life. At least I don't think it is. And there's always this moment of Schadenfreude when the CEO puts on the frontline worker's uniform and no one recognizes him or her. I don't know if that's really true, but if you're in a situation where people don't recognize you without the name tag, the nameplate next to your office, you don't get out nearly enough. And so I would argue that absolutely, the CEO needs to get out there. And in fact, you see really good companies doing this. The head of what's now called Orange, it was ING when they started their direct online banking. He would spend a day a week listening to actually not just listening to customer phone calls, he was actually taking customer phone calls. What better way to understand what's actually happening, the interaction between customer service and the company than to actually listen to the phone calls? Yeah. A friend of mine who used to work at one of the big financial, Fortune 50 company, major financial services company, he talked about how the leadership team would periodically fly to they'd leave New York City in their mahogany offices, carpeted floors, and they would fly to one of their second tier, third tier cities. Sometimes they go where their call centers were located. Sometimes they'd be in India, whatever. And they'd fly in and they'd get a little presentation in a conference room, and they'd hear the best customer service agent give a report about how things were going. And then they'd see a little PowerPoint presentation. And then they'd go home and say, all right, I understand what's going on. And the truth is they don't understand anything. They haven't seen anything. So going and seeing means really being where the work is happening, whether that means a machine shop or call center or cashier, the cash register in a supermarket, wherever that action is going on. That's where the leadership needs to be to really understand what's happening.
So let's say they've done that. They have done go and see. What's the next step?
So it's learning to frame a problem properly, and this is one of my big personal gripes, because people say, got to frame the problem. And no one ever says, here's what you should do to frame a problem, or here's what to consider. What does it mean to frame a problem? I never learned that. You and I both went to Stanford Business School, and not once did anyone talk about framing a problem. They gave you a case to analyze, but did you actually analyze it properly? And so for my money, framing a problem means being able to express the problem without embedding a solution. So for example, if you say the problem is our sales team doesn't have enough administrative support. That's not a problem. Just because you preface it with the problem is, that's really a solution masquerading as a problem. That's one of the most common situations. So what we want to do is make sure that we're not putting the solution into the problem. Another thing we want to do is be specific and not general. So I was talking to a client who said, this was the president of a startup tech company. She said, the problem is I need a sales manager I can trust. What does that mean? That's a solution. Yeah. It's a solution. And two, what does it mean? You don't trust them to follow the traffic signals? You don't trust them to not steal from the company till? Or is it that you don't trust them because they make promises that your software development team can't deliver on? Or you can't trust them to follow the pricing sheet? I mean, there's all kinds of issues here, right? Yeah. And what can you not trust them about? What about the hospital and the DIN? How would you frame that problem properly? Right. So what I would say is, I would say our customers, for our patients, our patients are unhappy with the level of noise they're experiencing. Mm-hmm. Not the hallways are too noisy, not he probably said the problem is we don't have carpeting, or the problem is that the linoleum floors rattle too much. Mm-hmm. There's the jumping to a solution or jumping to a conclusion. Whereas we could say our patient satisfaction scores are too low because of noise. That opens up avenues of inquiry to help us really understand what's going on. Okay, so let's say the CEO and everybody who's in charge of this problem, they've gone to see, they've thought about how do I frame just the problem, specific enough, and that it's the problem and not the solution. What should they do next? Yeah, well, next thing that you want to do is start to what I call thinking backwards. Some people may be familiar with a fishbone diagram that was developed, or an Ishikawa diagram that was developed by a professor of engineering at Tokyo University, a guy named Kaoru Ishikawa. And what you do with a fishbone diagram is start to look at it helps in the brainstorming. You start to group the potential causal factors, the things that are driving the symptom or the problem that you see. So in the case of what I've seen over and over again is when people start to brainstorm, you put them in a room and they go all over the place. And the fishbone diagram is called the fishbone diagram because you sketch something out that looks sort of like the bones of a fish. And so we could start looking at people, we could start looking at the various factors. So let's go to the hospital story. We could look at things that make noise. So we could look at the environment.
Mm-hmm.
We could look at time of day. Are people complaining in the morning or at night? What's happening during the morning versus night versus midday? Well, people are sleeping. We can look at the types of noise. Well, there's televisions, there's alarms. Hospital rooms are just filled with alarms. You can't go without more than 10 minutes without an alarm beeping in some way, shape, or form. Maybe that's the kind of complaint that people have. We could take a look at this staffing. Is it high levels of staff or low levels of staff? We could look at the kinds of noise they're hearing. There's televisions, there's gurneys going up and down, there's wheelchairs, there's people's conversation. And we could start to map these out and then try to identify, well, which are the primary causes, which are the secondary causes, or which is likely to be a major factor, which is likely to be a minor factor. Mm-hmm. And so by thinking backwards, and when I say backwards, what we're doing is saying, here's the visible problem. Mm-hmm. Let me think backwards or below it or beneath it or behind it to understand what's leading to it. And that gives us the ability to start to get beyond what I'm seeing visually and start to understand what the contributing factors are. And now I'm starting to get a fighting chance of solving a problem in a meaningful way.
So I'll review for the people who have been with us. So suppose somebody has gone to see, like the crime scene, they have framed the problem properly, just the problem and very specifically, and then they've done this thinking backwards. So what is the noise really? When does it happen? How is it happening? What's the next step?
The last step is to ask why. Why are we having this problem? And there's a thing in the world that I come from where we talk about asking the 5 whys. And the truth is, it may not be 5 whys, maybe 3 whys, maybe 11 whys. The idea is that we don't want to stop at a surface solution or a surface issue, because we most likely are putting a Band-Aid on a major issue. So, for example, if we go back to our hospital story, we could ask, why are we having this noise? Well, or why they complain about the noise? Because the TVs are loud. Why is that TV noise so easy to hear? Because the doors are kept open. Why are the doors kept open? Well, the nurses don't have an easy way to hear the patients if there is a problem. Okay. Why don't they have an easy way? Well, because the rooms haven't been outfitted with microphones or speakers or something like that. So if someone wants to get a nurse's attention, they have to yell, "Hey, Nurse Ratched." There's my Ken Kesey reference for you. Hey, I've got a problem. Yeah. So now what we might want to say is, gee, if we could create a system that allows people to communicate more easily, or maybe there'd be a light, even better, right? Have red, green lights in front of every door. All the person has to do is slap the button, the light turns red, and now the nurses can see. No one has to talk. You can leave the doors closed. But if you just close the doors, that could create a problem, as it is currently, because maybe the patients don't have an easy way of getting a nurse's attention. And so that's the kind of thing where we want to ask why multiple times to understand what's going on. And then we may find out, for example, that the reason they don't have intercoms is because the nurses, when they were designing this new wing, the nurses and the front care providers weren't talked to, they weren't consulted with, that's the word I want, with the architect and the builders. Mm-hmm. So if we want to prevent this from happening next time, we want to be sure to get those frontline providers, healthcare providers, in the room as they're mocking up the disability. It turns out my wife is actually a doctor. She's an interventional radiologist, and Sloan Kettering in New York. They just finished this building, the Koch Center, which costs God only knows how much, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars for all I know. And the architects were thinking, it would be really awesome for people to get natural light in the windows, which makes total sense, right? Who wants to work inside a cave? You know who does? Radiologists. Because radiologists are looking at screens, right? They've got these black and white screens, and having external light is not helping them. So they've got this building that costs $1 billion, brand new, state of the art. I mean, everything is the best, highest tech stuff. And they've got a sheet tacked up to the wall covering the window so that it can stay dark enough for them to read the scans. mean, you have to laugh at this, right? I mean,
That's really interesting.
insane.
It's just so funny how there are downstream effects. There's a beautiful building at Kendall Station in the Boston area. I think it's an MIT building. It's roundish. And what I had heard afterwards, after it was built, beautiful, beautiful, stunning building, that the furniture needed to be roundish. You can't really put a square desk as comfortably in this roundish building. So yeah, there's so many downstream interesting consequences.
Right. None of which are bad if you just think about it and actually go to see what the work is like for a radiologist. Try to understand what their life is like, and try to ask why and things like this. So if you don't, you end up with carpeting on the floor. You end up with sheets nailed up to the wall to cover up the light coming in from the window. I mean,
you end up with, so if you read Dan's book, I'll just put it up here, you end up with ayuping to conclusions instead of jumping to conclusions, which is a really fun aspect of his book. So you just end up doing a lot of things. I get it.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
So I'm going to put these up once more so people can see them. Go and see, frame a problem properly, think backwards with this fishbone diagram, which is in your book, and ask why many times, between 3 and 11, as you say. Got it.
Right.
And as we come to the end, I always love to ask 2 questions. For the people who are with us, what is a thought that you would like to leave everyone with in terms of this and avoiding jumping to conclusions?
So the thought is that we are trained through school, grade school, high school, college, university, beyond that. We're trained at work as well to raise your hands first and say, I've got the answer. And I really wish people could take away this notion of it's better to take 2 steps back before you take 1 step forward. It's better to say, hold on just 1 sec. Can we make sure that we understand the problem we're trying to solve? And that is hard to do because we've been trained to be the first kid in the class to raise our hands. We've been trained to be rewarded or to reward people for being fast with an answer. And I would prefer that people would be rewarded being fast with a question, to say, what problem are we trying to solve? Do we really understand it?
I love that idea. I think it just, I have 2 young kids, but I feel like it applies to parenting. Just even asking more of, well, so here's the problem, but ask me more, find out more what the problem is. That's really neat. That's really neat. So train yourself in that, so it's easier when you actually
and it's not easy because, of course, again, we've got 20, 30, 40, 50 years of rewards and training and cognitive biases that lead us to jump to the conclusions and to just say,
move fast. Yeah, cognitive biases, and we need to move fast. So all of it just leads to.
Absolutely right. I will add, by the way, Senya, you were kind enough to put the various things in the print on the bottom. All of the steps and handouts and all kinds of information are available for free at my website, theconclusiontrap.com. And so if anyone goes there, you can download free stuff. You don't have to, I won't spam you. You don't have to put in your email address or anything like that. And you can get the descriptions of what it is I'm talking about, articles, podcasts, and whatnot that support these ideas. If, for anyone who's interested in going deeper.
Fabulous.
Or just more of my dulcet tones.
Awesome. I've just dropped that into the chat so people can see the conclusiontrap.com. Question for you, our last question. If you could snap your fingers and almost everyone in the world were to take some action, what action would you want that to be?
Wow. Let me dramatically pause and clean my glasses while I think about that. Well, I think it would be to tell their husband, wife, spouse, partner, parents that they love them very much. But sort of that on a business standpoint, it would be, if I could train them, would be just to have them ask anytime they're in a meeting where they're trying to decide something, to say, what problem we're trying to solve. If they could just remember that one thing, that one question, what problem are we trying to solve?
What problem are we trying to solve?
The world would be a much better place.
Let's see if people do it. Let us know in the comments. If you're trying it out today, come back and let us know in the comments how it worked for you. What problem are we trying to solve? Dan, thank you so much. Thank you so very much. This has been wonderful.
It was a pleasure. It was great talking to someone who is a fellow alum and a fellow graduate of living in Japan.
Exactly. All the best. We've been here with Dan Markovitz. Thank you, Dan.
You are so welcome. Take care. Bye-bye.